He abandoned them, his girlfriend and baby daughters, and disappeared. 5 years later, he saw them again, and broke. Alexander Reeves had everything a man could want, or so it seemed to the outside world. He was 32, the CEO of one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the country, and already a self-made millionaire. Tall and commanding, with striking blonde hair and piercing blue eyes, he moved through boardrooms and charity galas like a prince of industry. He was known for his intellect, feared for his ruthlessness, and admired for his success. Yet beneath the finely tailored suits and the constant glare of flashbulbs, there was a hollowness in his gaze, something not even he could quite name. Emma Brooks was unlike anyone Alexander had ever known. A painter from a modest background, she had no interest in wealth or power. Her eyes were deep brown, full of stories, and her long, wavy hair always seemed to be dusted with flecks of paint. They met at a fundraiser in New York. He was a reluctant guest, she was showing her artwork in the corner of the hall. Their connection was unexpected and electric. Emma didn't care who he was. She spoke to him like he was just a man, not a brand, not a figure, not a headline. He found her raw honesty disarming. She found his hidden vulnerability beneath the arrogance strangely human. They spent 6 months together, the kind of whirlwind romance that feels like a dream even while you're living it. They laughed more than he ever thought possible. He watched her paint in silence, she watched him work with fascination. She taught him to slow down, to feel, to sit still long enough to breathe. He showed her how to dream bigger, how to believe she deserved more. It wasn't perfect, he was cold at times, distant without explanation. There were days he pulled away, moments when he stared too long at nothing. But Emma believed in the good she saw in him, and Alexander clung to the light she brought into his life, even if he didn't understand it. Then Emma found out she was pregnant. With twins. She was terrified and overjoyed all at once. When she told Alexander, his reaction was like a thunderclap in the middle of a clear sky. He stared at her as if she had betrayed him, as if she had shattered something sacred. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't curse or accuse. He just went silent. Completely, terrifyingly silent. For the next few weeks, he drifted further away. He missed doctor's appointments. He stopped returning her texts. When the girls, Sophia and Lily, were born, he came to the hospital only once. He held them for a moment, said they were beautiful, and left without saying goodbye. When the twins were 4 months old, he vanished entirely. One day he was there, distant but present, and the next, he was gone. No calls. No support. No explanation. Emma searched for him, even drove to his company once, only to be turned away at the front desk like a stranger. A few weeks later, a lawyer contacted her on his behalf with a single message: there will be no involvement. No further contact. Along with the message came a lump sum of money, sent as if it could buy her silence, as if it could erase their story. Emma never touched the money. She packed away every photo of him, every reminder, and focused on surviving. Alexander Reeves disappeared from their lives like a ghost, leaving behind 2 tiny girls who would never know their father and a woman who had trusted a man who turned out to be colder than winter. The early days after Alexander's disappearance were the hardest of Emma's life. At 26, she found herself alone in a 1-bedroom apartment with 2 newborns and no job, no savings, and no family to lean on. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19, and she had no siblings. What little support system she had was made up of fellow artists and a few acquaintances, none of whom could do more than offer sympathy and the occasional babysitting favor. Her world had shrunk to the cries of 2 tiny girls who needed more than she knew how to give. There were nights when she sat on the bathroom floor, the door closed, a towel stuffed under the crack to muffle the sound of her sobbing so she wouldn't wake the babies. She was exhausted beyond words, surviving on instant oatmeal and stale coffee, rationing baby formula like it was gold. Her hands were cracked from constant cleaning, her back ached from lifting and holding both girls, and her eyes, once filled with life and color, were dulled by sleepless nights and silent tears. But no matter how tired she was, no matter how overwhelmed she felt, she never let it show when she was with Sophia and Lily. When they looked at her with their round blue eyes, she smiled. She kissed their foreheads and whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep, that they would be okay, that life would be better, that they would never feel unwanted. She began working nights as a janitor in an office building downtown. It was the only job she could find that paid even slightly above minimum wage and didn't require a college degree or flexible hours, both luxuries she couldn't afford. During the day, she watched the girls, changing diapers, rocking them to sleep, feeding them with trembling hands when her own stomach growled from hunger. She napped in 10-minute intervals when she could, usually with one baby on her chest and the other curled into the crook of her arm. She didn't sleep so much as shut down, then wake up again the second one of them made a sound. She sold most of her belongings, her easel, her canvases, the vintage record player she loved, even the silver bracelet her mother had given her before she died. Each sale felt like giving up a piece of herself, but the money went toward diapers, wipes, powdered formula, and rent. She learned how to stretch $1 until it screamed. Sometimes she went days without eating more than toast or canned soup just to make sure the girls had what they needed. Pride had no place in her world anymore. She rarely thought about Alexander in those days, and when she did, it was with a kind of numb disbelief. It was hard to reconcile the man who had once held her hand and traced the outline of her jaw with the man who had abandoned his daughters without looking back. She told herself over and over that she didn't need him, that the girls didn't either. But there were moments, quiet, lonely moments at 3 a.m. with one baby wailing and the other burning with fever, when she wondered how he could live with himself, knowing what he'd left behind. In time, she found small pockets of strength. A kind woman at the corner deli started saving her leftover bread and milk. A retired neighbor in her building offered to watch the girls for an hour each afternoon so Emma could take a nap or walk outside. These gestures became lifelines, little reminders that not all people were cruel or selfish. Slowly, she started to rebuild. She took on a second job at a cafe on weekends, bringing the girls with her in a double stroller and letting them nap in the back while she cleaned tables and refilled coffee pots. Her fingers ached from overuse, her eyes burned from lack of sleep, but her spirit, though battered, did not break. What she couldn't give the girls in material comfort, she gave them in love. She read to them constantly, even when they were too young to understand the words. She sang to them while folding laundry, made silly faces to make them giggle, and kept a journal where she wrote letters to each of them, chronicling their milestones, their personalities, their laughter. In that journal, she allowed herself to dream, of a day when they would run through parks without worry, when she could buy them books and shoes without checking the price tag, when they would grow up knowing they were cherished and safe. Emma lived each day minute by minute. There was no long-term plan, no grand vision for the future, only the next bottle, the next nap, the next shift at work. But even in that constant state of survival, she was building something fierce and unbreakable. Love rooted deeper than fear. Resilience born from pain. She was not just surviving for herself anymore. She was living for two little girls who had no idea what had been taken from them, but who would one day know what had been built in its place. By the time Sophia and Lily turned 3, something in Emma had shifted. Life was still hard, there were still months when rent came down to the last dollar, nights when the girls coughed through their sleep and Emma sat awake with worry pooling in her chest, but there was also light now. The girls had grown into joyful, curious children, with wild blonde curls and impossibly bright blue eyes that turned heads wherever they went. They were inseparable, speaking in a shared language of laughter and small secrets, finishing each other's sentences before they were fully formed. Emma watched them with awe, always with a trace of disbelief that these perfect little people had come from her. Despite everything, despite the weight she carried and the loneliness that still crept in late at night, her daughters were happy, and in their happiness, she found strength. One Saturday afternoon in early spring, Emma took the girls to a local street fair. It had been a last-minute decision, a spontaneous break from their usual routine of work, errands, and quiet evenings at home. The streets were lined with stalls selling handmade goods, food trucks with the smell of funnel cake and roasted corn drifting through the air, and performers juggling or painting faces. Emma had scraped together enough to buy the girls matching white dresses a few weeks earlier at a thrift store, and that morning she'd carefully washed and ironed them. She didn't know why she did it. Maybe it was just a small act of hope, a declaration that her daughters deserved beauty too. While the girls danced in circles to the sound of a street violinist, a local photographer who had been covering the event noticed them. He was drawn by their energy, the way they moved in perfect unison without any choreography, their golden hair catching the sunlight as they spun. Without interrupting them, he snapped a photo. It was just a moment, two sisters laughing in the middle of a crowded street, unaware of the camera or the world watching. He uploaded it to his photography blog that night, titling it, Joy. What he didn't expect was for the photo to go viral within hours. People responded with emotion, flooding the comments with words like magical, pure, and hopeful. The photo was shared across social media, featured on community pages and eventually picked up by a popular online magazine that focused on human interest stories. Emma only found out about it when her friend from the cafe called her in a frenzy, saying, "I swear I just saw your girls on the front page of the internet." At first, Emma panicked. She wasn't used to being seen, not after so many years of trying to stay invisible. But when she saw the image, their tiny hands clasped, their faces lit with innocent delight, she cried. Not from fear, but from something else, something long dormant, pride. A few days later, she was contacted by a children's modeling agency based in the city. The representative had seen the photo and wanted to meet with Emma and the girls. At first, Emma hesitated. It sounded too good to be true, and she had learned the hard way not to trust promises wrapped in glitter. But the agency was legitimate, professional, and kind. They offered her full control, no pressure, and the opportunity to make real money, money that could change everything. The girl's first job was a simple ad for a clothing brand that specialized in sibling outfits. The photo shoot was set in a sunlit studio filled with plush toys and colorful props. Emma stayed beside them the entire time, never letting them out of her sight. To her surprise, Sophia and Lily took to the camera naturally, giggling and playing without fear, reacting to the photographer like it was all just a game. The brand loved them. Other offers followed. It wasn't long before Emma was able to leave her cleaning job and reduce her hours at the cafe. For the first time, they had breathing room, enough to pay rent early, to buy fresh fruit without calculating cost per ounce, to replace the girls' worn shoes with new ones that actually fit. She still lived cautiously. Every time she deposited a check, she did it with the haunted awareness that it could all disappear as suddenly as it had arrived. But she also began to allow herself small indulgences. She bought new art supplies and began painting again during the girls' naps. At first, her hands were stiff, her strokes hesitant, as if she had forgotten the language of color. But then the muscle memory returned, and with it, a flood of emotion she had long held back. Her first new painting was of the girls at the street fair, recreated from memory. She titled it, Still Spinning. Emma also started keeping a portfolio again. Nothing public, just a folder on her desk with scanned images of her work. It felt like planting seeds she wasn't sure would bloom, but the act alone made her feel alive. When the girls asked her to tell them stories, she began inventing picture books on the spot, narrating tales of brave princesses who didn't need rescuing, of twin sisters who crossed forests and tamed dragons with kindness. Sometimes, she sketched the characters afterward, tucking the drawings into the back of her journal. Life wasn't easy, not by any means. There were still bad days, tantrums, fevers, bills she forgot, moments of doubt so loud they echoed. But now, there was something else too, possibility. A future she could imagine without panic. She no longer walked with her head down, no longer avoided mirrors or the faces of strangers. Something had shifted. She had not only survived, but begun to build. And it all started with a single photograph, a moment of unfiltered joy that the world happened to witness. Alexander Reeves hadn't thought about Emma or the twins in years. Not in any real way. On the rare occasions their names passed through his mind, it was more like a dull echo than a memory, as if they had happened to someone else in another life. He had buried that chapter so deeply that it might as well have never existed. In his world, there was no room for hesitation, no time to revisit the past. Business had taken over everything. His company had doubled in value since the year he walked away, and he now spent his days flying between cities, closing deals, shaking hands with billionaires, and standing under lights that never quite warmed him. Every aspect of his life was calculated, curated, and efficient. The people closest to him were assistants and publicists. The closest thing he had to family was his driver. One Thursday evening, at a charity gala in Manhattan, his carefully constructed distance was shattered. The event was a high-profile art showcase supporting children's literacy, something his PR team had urged him to attend for the sake of optics. He arrived late, dressed in his usual sharp black suit, prepared to make an appearance and leave without lingering. The gallery space was white and minimal, dotted with children's illustrations, many of them playful and colorful. He moved through the crowd with practiced indifference until he stopped in front of one particular painting that made the air catch in his lungs. It was a watercolor piece, soft and dreamlike, depicting two small girls holding hands in a sunlit street, laughing under strings of carnival lights. Their dresses were white. Their golden hair fell in soft curls. Their eyes, bright, clear, unmistakable, were blue. The painting wasn't signed, but the placard below read, Sophia and Lily Brooks, by E. Brooks. He stared at the names. The world seemed to tilt slightly beneath him. He tried to walk away, but couldn't. He stood there for too long, people passing by without noticing that the man with the perfect posture had turned to stone. 1,000 thoughts surged through him, but none could take shape. He found himself searching the crowd, scanning every woman's face, hoping he wouldn't find her, and terrified he might. Emma. He hadn't said her name aloud in 5 years. Seeing it in initials was enough to make something buried in his chest crack open. That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat in his penthouse with the lights off, staring at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows, trying to control the pounding in his chest. He pulled out his phone and typed Sophia and Lily Brooks into the search bar, unsure what he even expected to find. Within seconds, the photo appeared, the one from the street fair. It had circulated for months, but he had never seen it. There they were again, laughing, spinning, alive in a way that felt like lightning in a photograph. He clicked on the article and scanned it quickly, his fingers tightening when he reached the line, Mother Emma Brooks credits her daughter's joy with helping her survive unimaginable hardship. There was no mention of him. No clue that he had ever existed. It was as though the earth had swallowed him up, and the world had moved on. He spent the next several hours clicking through every link he could find, reading interviews, watching clips, tracing a life that had unfolded entirely without him. The girls had appeared in a handful of ad campaigns, always together, always smiling. Emma had quietly started selling paintings again, children's illustrations, small commissions, nothing flashy, but enough to be noticed in local art circles. She looked different in the photos. Older, stronger, her features softer but her posture firmer. There was a steadiness in her face, a calm he didn't remember. And yet, he could still see the Emma he had known in the way she held her daughter's hands, in the tilt of her head when she smiled at them. The guilt hit him like a blow to the chest, sudden and merciless. He had told himself for years that leaving had been the right thing to do, that he wasn't built to be a father, that Emma and the girls would be better off without him, that disappearing was a kind of mercy. But the rationalizations fell apart in the quiet of that night, drowned by the undeniable reality of what he had missed. He had missed first steps, first words, birthdays, nights of fever and comfort, laughter that might have been his to hear. He had left behind not a broken version of himself, but 2 living, breathing children who had never even known his name. The next morning, he cancelled all his meetings and made a call to a private investigator. It didn't take long. Within 24 hours, he had their address. It was a small apartment on the edge of Brooklyn, modest but clean, with flower boxes on the windowsills and chalk drawings on the sidewalk outside. He drove there himself, sitting in the back of a black car, staring at the building as if it were the edge of a cliff. The driver asked if he wanted to get out. Alexander didn't answer. He watched, frozen, as a door opened and two small girls ran down the steps. They were laughing, pulling each other toward the street. Behind them, Emma followed, calling gently after them, holding a bag of groceries in one hand and tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear with the other. Time stopped. He hadn't imagined it. They were real. The girls were real. Emma was real. And he was the ghost. He watched them disappear around the corner. He didn't get out. He didn't speak. He just sat there, completely undone, his chest heavy with a realization he couldn't escape. They had built a world without him, and it was beautiful. And yet, even from a distance, he felt the overwhelming, aching pull of it. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Reeves didn't know what to do next. Alexander returned to that Brooklyn street 3 times before he found the courage to step out of the car. Each time, he sat in the back seat, watching the front door of Emma's apartment from behind the tinted windows, heart thudding in his chest like a hammer striking steel. He told himself he was just gathering information, just observing, just waiting for the right moment. But the truth was simpler and far more humiliating. He was afraid. He was a man who had stood in boardrooms before the most powerful people in the world, negotiated deals worth millions without flinching, silenced entire rooms with a single look, and yet he couldn't bring himself to face a woman he had abandoned and the daughters he had never held beyond their first few days of life. It was not fear of confrontation that held him back. It was shame. On the 4th day, just past noon, he stepped out of the car. He was wearing a wool coat over a dark suit, his usual uniform, though now it felt like armor. In one hand, he carried a small paper bag holding 2 identical teddy bears he had chosen after pacing through a toy store for an hour. In the other, a sealed envelope containing a letter he had rewritten at least 20 times. The words still didn't feel right. There was no way to say what needed to be said, not without sounding inadequate. But he carried it anyway. The sidewalk was quiet. A few fallen leaves scraped along the pavement in the wind. His polished shoes echoed against the concrete as he walked toward the door, each step heavier than the last. He paused at the top of the steps, staring at the brass numbers on the door, willing himself to knock. His hand hovered midair, then dropped. He couldn't do it. Not like this. He turned, ready to walk away again, when the door opened behind him. Lily was the first to appear. She was smaller than he expected, wearing a pink hoodie with cartoon cats on the front and holding a small juice box. She glanced up at him with wide blue eyes that matched his exactly. There was no recognition in her face, only the cautious curiosity of a child meeting a stranger. A moment later, Sophia came out behind her, chattering excitedly about something, followed by Emma, who froze mid-sentence when she saw him. For a long, suffocating second, no one moved. Emma stared at him, her arms instinctively reaching out to the girls, her body shifting in front of them with quiet, protective force. She didn't say his name, didn't blink, didn't breathe. Alexander's throat closed. The bag in his hand felt suddenly ridiculous. He took one step forward and offered the envelope, his voice dry and unsteady. "I'm sorry for coming like this. I didn't know any other way." Emma's expression didn't change. She looked down at the envelope, then back at him. Her eyes weren't angry. They weren't soft either. They were hard in a way that came from years of silence, of enduring without closure. She took the letter with the tips of her fingers, as if it might burn. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice calm and level. Alexander swallowed. "I don't know," he said honestly. "To see them. To see you. To say I'm sorry, even though it's nowhere near enough." At his voice, the girls looked up again. Sophia tilted her head. "Mommy, who is he?" Emma didn't answer right away. Her jaw clenched. She turned to the girls and knelt beside them. "He's someone we used to know. Someone who made a mistake." Lily looked at him again, her tiny brow furrowed. "Is he sad?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Yes. Very sad." Something in Alexander broke. He lowered himself to one knee, not daring to get any closer. His voice cracked when he spoke again. "I've missed so much. I deserve nothing from you. But I just needed. I needed to see that you were okay." Emma stood, keeping the girls close. "We are," she said quietly. "We've been okay for a long time." He nodded slowly, a tight, barely visible motion, his chest heavy with regret. "I can go. I didn't mean to cause trouble." For the first time, Emma really looked at him, looked past the expensive coat and designer shoes, past the perfectly styled hair and polished exterior. She saw what she had once seen before anyone else had. She saw the trembling edges of a man unraveling. "No," she said, surprising herself. "You don't get to walk away again. Not this time." He looked up at her, startled. "You want to see them," she said, her voice low. "You want to be something in their lives. Then you show up. You prove it. You earn it. Because they don't know who you are. And I'm not going to let you hurt them again." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I'll do anything." "I'm not promising you a place," she said, stepping back. "You're not their father just because you share their blood. You have to become one." "I know," he whispered. Emma looked down at the teddy bears in his hand, then at the girls. "You can leave those on the porch." Alexander carefully placed the bag beside the steps. Then he turned and walked back toward the car, not knowing if he would ever be allowed inside that world again, but knowing he would return. Not as a CEO. Not as the man he had been. But as someone willing to do the work, however long it took. And as he climbed into the car, wiping a tear that had escaped without permission, he realized that for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt human. And maybe, just maybe, that was a beginning. The weeks that followed were anything but simple. Emma didn't invite Alexander back into their lives. She didn't forgive him overnight, nor did she hand over access to the girls simply because he had shown up with a remorseful expression and a letter full of regrets. Her trust was not something he could reclaim with a visit or a gift. It had been shattered 5 years ago, and she had spent every day since then learning how to live without expecting anyone to pick up the pieces. What Alexander had done, walking away when their daughters were only 4 months old, was not a mistake easily glossed over. It had been abandonment in its most complete form. And though her wounds had scarred over, the ache still lived just beneath the surface. What changed, however, was that Emma now saw the pain in him too. Not as a justification, not as a redemption, but as a doorway. He showed up again 2 days later, this time without flowers, without letters, without gifts. Just himself. He stood on the same step, waiting patiently, and when Emma opened the door, he simply asked, "Can I talk to someone? A therapist? A counselor? Whatever it takes. I just want to understand how to do this right." She was stunned by the sincerity of his tone. She didn't answer at first, but something in her finally allowed her to nod, just once, before closing the door. That was how it began. Emma filed for full legal custody shortly after. It wasn't revenge. It was protection. She wasn't sure if Alexander would keep coming, and she wasn't going to gamble her daughter's safety on someone who had already proven how easily he could disappear. He didn't fight it. In fact, he offered to pay for every legal expense. He signed every document, admitted to every failure, and when the court date arrived, he sat there quietly, listening as Emma's lawyer laid out the history of abandonment in exacting detail. His own attorney had advised him to contest, or at least to negotiate partial visitation. But Alexander refused. "She's right," he said in a statement to the judge. "She's done everything. I wasn't there. I don't get to make demands." The media caught wind of the story, of course. A high-profile millionaire CEO being sued for child support by a single mother with two photogenic daughters was too tempting a narrative to ignore. The headlines were brutal: tech tycoon's secret family, millionaire dad abandoned twins, mom raises daughters alone, now he wants back in. Reporters stalked Emma's building. Cameras waited outside her job. Strangers online picked apart her parenting, speculated on her motives, called her both a saint and a gold digger. Through it all, Emma remained silent. She issued no statements. She refused all interviews. Her priority was protecting Sophia and Lily, shielding them from a world that had no right to their story. Alexander, to his credit, never spoke to the press either. His PR team begged him to release a carefully worded apology, to spin the story into something digestible and forgivable. He fired them. Then he took the money he would have spent on damage control and donated it, quietly, without announcement, to a non-profit that provided support for single mothers and children in foster care. He also started attending therapy, 3 times a week, with a specialist in parental trauma and family reintegration. He didn't tell Emma this. He wasn't trying to earn points. He was trying to become someone his daughters wouldn't be ashamed to meet. Slowly, cautiously, Emma allowed a sliver of contact. It began with supervised meetings at a neutral facility. The girls were told that Alexander was a friend, someone who cared about them. They were curious, open-hearted, without the weight of history to cloud their view. At first, Alexander sat stiffly on the edge of the playroom rug, overwhelmed by the smallness of their voices and the bigness of his own guilt. But children are strange and generous creatures, and they accepted him with surprising ease, asking him to help build block towers, play memory card games, and read books with silly voices. He followed their lead, never pushing, never correcting, never once referring to himself as their father. He was just Alex. The man with the tired eyes and the careful smile. Emma watched everything. She was never more than a room away. And while her heart remained guarded, she could not deny what she saw. Alexander was trying, not performatively, not for attention, but with a quiet desperation that suggested he was terrified of being given this chance and ruining it. He asked questions. He listened. He never once tried to rewrite the past or diminish the pain. And when the girls started referring to him as our Alex, it was Emma who felt her chest tighten with a feeling she hadn't let herself feel in a long time, reluctant hope. There were setbacks, of course. Times when the girls asked why he hadn't been there when they were babies, and Alexander's voice faltered trying to explain. Times when Emma nearly told him to leave again, when the weight of old wounds threatened to drag her under. But he kept coming back. Not with promises, not with apologies, but with presence. He showed up. Rain or shine, tired or overwhelmed, he never missed a session, never asked for more than he was given. In court, he was officially granted limited visitation, contingent on continued therapy and supervised engagement. He accepted it all with the quiet dignity of a man who had lost something precious and was learning how to earn it back piece by piece. The judge noted, on record, the extraordinary growth and accountability Alexander had demonstrated, a rare thing, he said, in cases like these. For the first time in 5 years, there was no longer silence between them. There was pain, yes, and distance, and many things left unsaid. But there was also conversation. And in that fragile, unfinished space, something began to take root. Not forgiveness yet. Not trust. But the beginning of something that could one day become both. 2 years passed. They didn't fly by, and they didn't heal everything, but they passed in their slow, honest way, day by day, season by season. Alexander showed up for every visit, every birthday, every school recital, and every scraped knee he was allowed to be present for. He sat through awkward teacher-parent meetings beside Emma in tiny plastic chairs, always careful not to overstep, always grateful just to be there. He never tried to force affection, never expected the girls to call him Dad. He was just Alex, the man who made them laugh with bad jokes and always remembered their favorite colors, who took them to the bookstore every other Saturday and let them pick out one book each without checking the price tag. His love didn't come in grand gestures, but in consistency. He became, slowly and without announcement, a fixture in their world, not the center, but a strong and steady part of it. Emma remained cautious, though no longer cold. She was a mother first and always. Her trust had been earned incrementally, like sand filling a jar one grain at a time. What surprised her most was not how much Alexander had changed, but how unafraid he was to let her see the effort behind the change. He didn't act like a man who had everything figured out. He admitted when he felt unsure. He asked for her opinion. He apologized, not just for the past, but for small things in the present, the little stumbles that most people ignored. He had become a man who took responsibility even when he could have made excuses, and that, more than anything else, made her start to believe in him again. By now, the girls were 7. They had grown taller, their baby features giving way to early glimpses of the young women they'd one day become. They still wore matching outfits sometimes, not because Emma dressed them that way, but because they insisted on it. They loved storytime and science kits, played soccer in the park, and had an alarming amount of opinions about everything from breakfast cereal to politics. And somewhere along the way, they had started calling him our Alex less and Dad more. Not every time, not consistently, but enough to catch in his throat when it happened. Emma didn't rush to define what they were now. She didn't need a label for it. Their lives had grown into something real, something rooted in mutual effort. They didn't live together. Emma had drawn that boundary early, but Alexander had moved to a neighborhood just 20 minutes away. He found a modest townhouse with a small garden and invited the girls to plant flowers there on weekends. They chose daisies and sunflowers and called it the Happy Corner. He never tried to take over parenting decisions but started asking to be included in things like school enrollment forms and doctor visits. And after a while, Emma started saying yes. Then came the day that would change everything again, but in a way no one expected. A nationally broadcast talk show, known for honoring everyday heroes and surprise reunions, reached out to Emma's contact email after discovering her artwork and the viral photo of the twins from years earlier. At first, she declined. She wasn't interested in turning their story into a spectacle. But after several conversations, she realized the show's purpose wasn't fame, it was recognition, and more importantly, a platform. They wanted to highlight the resilience of single mothers, the beauty of family built through struggle, and the quiet strength behind people who survive what seems impossible. Emma agreed on one condition: the focus would be on the girls and the art, not the pain. Alexander was invited too, at the producer's suggestion, but Emma was the one who decided to let him come. She told him with a note, simple and short, "They want you there." So do I. The studio was large and bright, filled with cameras and a live audience, but the warmth of the host made it feel more like a living room than a stage. Emma and the girls were seated first, the host guiding them through questions about art, about growing up together, about laughter and healing. There were smiles, some tears, and even a few laughs from the crowd when Lily declared that her mom was better than superheroes, because she doesn't even need a cape to save the day. Then the host gestured toward the side stage and introduced the next guest. Alexander walked out to soft applause. The girls rushed to hug him, completely unbothered by the cameras, and the host gently asked him to share his side of the story. He didn't sugarcoat it. He said he had failed. He said he had walked away from something precious because he was afraid and broken. He admitted he hadn't deserved a second chance, but that Emma had given him the opportunity to become the kind of man he should have been all along. And that the girls, through their love and openness, had taught him how to be a father. There wasn't a dry eye in the room when he turned to Emma, reached into his jacket pocket, and unfolded a small piece of paper. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a proposal in the traditional sense. It was a promise, handwritten and imperfect. He read aloud. You gave them life. You gave me a soul. You taught me what love looks like when it's hard, and what grace means when it's undeserved. I'm not asking for forever. I'm asking for the chance to keep showing up, for them, and for you. The crowd held its breath. Emma said nothing at first. She looked at him for a long time, the memory of everything they had been and everything they had survived flickering across her face. Then she reached for his hand. Not with a dramatic gesture, not with tears, but with a quiet, knowing look. A signal. Yes. Maybe not forever yet. But yes to now. Yes to healing. Yes to continuing forward. The audience stood. The host stepped back. The cameras faded. And for a moment, the world outside the studio disappeared, leaving only the four of them, two children who had never stopped believing in magic, a mother who had become a fortress, and a man learning how to be a home. It was not a perfect ending. It was not a fairy tale. It was something better, a real beginning. 6 months later, the rhythm of their lives had changed, not dramatically, not like a sudden plot twist in a novel, but slowly, naturally, the way tides pull the shore inch by inch. Emma and Alexander did not move in together, nor did they rush toward a new label. There were no grand declarations or contracts. But there was presence. There was time shared, effort matched, and decisions made together without fear or resentment. The lines that had once been drawn in iron had softened into something more fluid. Alexander now picked up the girls from school on Wednesdays, stayed for dinner on Fridays, and often spent Sunday mornings with them at the farmer's market, letting Lily convince him to buy jam he didn't need and Sophia challenge him to races between produce stalls. It became a pattern, a partnership not forged by obligation but by earned trust. Emma still guarded her independence fiercely. After all those years of surviving alone, of proving she could hold the world on her shoulders, she didn't hand over her life like a gift to be unwrapped. But she no longer carried the burden alone. She let Alexander carry pieces of it. Not just the parenting parts, but the quiet things too, the school forms, the forgotten laundry, the mornings when she was too tired to cook. And slowly, her defenses stopped feeling like armor and started feeling like boundaries that could bend without breaking. Alexander had changed in ways that few people ever do. He still ran his company, still wore expensive suits, still held meetings with investors and developers, but there was something unshakably different about him. He no longer operated from a place of detachment. He spoke less like a man in control and more like a man paying attention. He had made himself into a listener. He had learned to say, I don't know, and, you were right, and, I'm sorry, not out of weakness, but out of a deep respect for the life he had once walked away from and now was honored to be allowed back into. The man who had once vanished without a word now stayed, when it was inconvenient, when it was painful, when it required patience and humility. And the girls noticed. Children are always watching, even when they don't understand. Sophia began drawing pictures of their family with 4 figures instead of 3. Lily started calling him Dad in casual conversation, not asking permission, not making a ceremony of it, just claiming the word like it had always belonged. Emma continued painting. Her work had gained quiet recognition after the talk show aired. Small galleries reached out. A few publishers asked if she would consider illustrating children's books. She said yes to one, a gentle story about twin sisters who chase stars and build homes out of light, and for the first time in years, she felt herself standing not only as a mother, but as an artist, as a woman with something of her own again. Her world was no longer defined by survival, but by creation. The girls watched her paint at the kitchen table, sometimes adding doodles in the corners, asking questions about the characters. It was not glamorous, but it was deeply alive. The apartment, once cramped and tired, felt like a place where things grew now. One afternoon, just before the school year ended, the 4 of them went to the park where the original street fair had taken place years before. The girls ran ahead, chasing one another, laughing in their matching dresses, still radiant with that same joy that had once stopped time in a single photograph. Emma and Alexander sat on a bench beneath a tree, watching them, not speaking for a while. There was no need. They were surrounded by the sounds of children's laughter, rustling leaves, and the familiar rhythm of a shared silence. Finally, Alexander turned to her and said, "I used to think love had to be earned with perfection. But you taught me it's earned with consistency. With showing up even when you're afraid." Emma looked at him, not with the fierce intensity of old anger, but with the quiet strength of someone who has outlived her own heartbreak. "Perfection was never what I wanted," she said. "Just truth. Just someone who stays when it's hard." And he had stayed. Not because he wanted to rewrite the past, but because he was ready to live the future, honestly, messily, and together. That night, as the girls fell asleep curled up against Emma on the couch, a quiet rain tapped against the windows. Alexander stood in the kitchen washing dishes, humming a tune he didn't even realize he knew. He didn't need a ceremony or a title or applause. He had a home now, not a place, but a belonging. A chance to keep showing up. And in the small, quiet way that matters most, he had finally become the man they deserved. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was real. This story isn't about redemption through romance or neat resolutions. It's about the slow, often painful work of becoming accountable for the damage we cause, and the rare courage it takes to forgive without forgetting. Alexander's transformation isn't heroic, it's human. He doesn't earn a fairy tale ending because he returns, he earns it because he chooses, again and again, to stay when it's uncomfortable, humbling, and hard. And Emma's strength lies not only in her survival but in her refusal to let bitterness define her. She protects, she builds, and eventually, she lets light back in, not because she needs saving, but because she recognizes when someone finally learns how to love the right way. The real beauty of this ending is that it doesn't promise perfection. It promises effort. And sometimes, that's the most honest and powerful kind of love there is.